Okay, we are live. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Archives Month live stream. What we're going to do today is we're going to discuss how collaborations between archival repositories can deepen and enrich your research. My name is Karen Urbec, and I am the archivist at Vizcaya Museum and Gardens. And I'm co-presenting today with Luis Berthin, who is the archivist at the Black Archives and Historic Lyric Theater. So today we will be discussing Vizcaya's financial records and the data about who worked here and when. And we'll show that how that information can help when researching your personal genealogy. We'd like this to be a conversation. So our Vizcaya's Director of Marketing, Alex Cerna, she's in the background and she is monitoring the chat. So please feel free to put questions in the chat and they'll pop up as we're talking so you can participate in the conversation in real time. So with that, Louis?
All right, ready to get started. So, yeah, just wanted to talk a little bit about the collaboration. So again, business records, you wouldn't tend to think of them as a source to be able to find information on family members. But, when Karen and I were talking about this initially, and she told me about this list of workers from this guy's history, that blew my mind. I mean, that's incredible. Because first of all, being able to compile all that information is a lot of work. And so I kind of want to take a little bit of time to talk about that. So how did the list come to be compiled?
Okay, so we have a list and I have the number that has 610 names on it. And those names come from some from our correspondence collection and some from our financial records. So in our archive, we have financial records that are the special account for Paul Chalfin, who is our artistic director and who did a lot of shopping and purchasing for the estate. We have contractor expense reports and we have shipping receipts and packing slips. And so especially from the contractor expense reports, we have daily logs, which I can actually, let me see, if we look at I think it's slide 4, we can see an example of a daily log from the Fred T. Lay Company. And, that's the next one. That's George Sykes. So there were 2 contractors who worked on Vizcaya, George Sykes, and then later Fred T. Lay and Company. And so there are names listed of who was working in the work that they were doing. And about 10 years ago, we had an intern who came in and went through all of these logs and a lot of the correspondence and pulled out as many names as she could identify. And what's great about that is, because when we talk in a little bit about ancestry research and genealogy, one of the best resources that I find on ancestry is the U.S. Census data, but that just gives you a snapshot at 1 year and every 10 years. Whereas with this, we have this for multiple years, and so it places a person in Miami at a specific date and time, and we know that they were here because they were here working.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So, now we're talking about these logs, right? And so let's talk about the elephant in the room, right? Because obviously I'm a representative of the Black Archive, so we're going to be focusing on Black workers who work in the state, right? So the truth of the matter is that Black workers were not always recorded. And this can be for any multitude of reasons. So it can be institutional racism. They were paid in cash or paid under the table. So, we, as historians, as archivists, we don't want to attribute any of that. We can't say definitively that this was one way or another. These are just things that we have to kind of keep in mind. And especially if you were a genealogist, which I'm sure I have genealogists in the crowd, so please feel free to throw in any comment. But that it makes searching for records a little more difficult, especially if people weren't recorded. There are no records to be found. So that was another reason why this list was so astounding, because you guys had really compiled, and we don't have any images of the actual list. We don't want to excite everyone with Excel tables. So, but it really did a great job of like trying to put together all the facts that they could find on these people that we selected. And so, yeah, you know, being able to, first of all, being able to find the record and being able to trace back where they were born. So we'll go into a little bit of that when we get to the genealogy section. But yeah, it is incredible work, and it's very difficult to do, especially going through, I don't know how many records that intern went through, but that, I mean, really is stellar work.
No, it took quite a while, and there are quite a few records. And it's also one of the things is where the contractor would be paid, but then the contractor would keep their own. The logs list people, but not everyone who worked that day would necessarily make the log, or the superintendent makes the list, but then the people, sort of the subcontractors don't necessarily make the list. So that then makes it even harder that someone was here, but they may not have made an official record. The other thing is so the financial records cover from 1916 to 1921, but of course Vizcaya was completed. The main house was completed in 1916. Construction started a couple years earlier, and the gardens weren't done until 22. So there are obviously missing records. There are documents that were lost to history, and we don't have those. We don't have that data. So there's always holes in the information as well.
Right. And so actually wanted to touch on a little bit of this because you guys have done some of your own, not necessarily genealogical work, but you guys did connect a family member to an ancestor of his, and that was your work with Eustace Edgecombe.
Mm-hmm.
I know you want to talk about that a little bit, but I also thought that was a great project.
Yes, Eustace Edgecombe was a Bahamian immigrant. He came, I forget the exact year that he came to Miami, but he was young. He was 10 or 11 years old, and he started working in the gardens and worked his way up. And he finally he passed away in 1969, and he was still working at Vizcaya then. He was working as superintendent almost. And so we had through our oh my goodness, it just fell out of my head, of course. But we had a live stories that we were doing a few months ago, and we had Mr. Edgecombe's grandson come through, and we had an opportunity to talk to him and meet him and tour him around. And he had not known a lot of his grandfather's history beyond Vizcaya. Thank you, Alex. We had not known a lot. He had not known a lot of his grandfather's history, and so it was really special for us to be able to meet him and talk to him. And tell him that his grandfather was a very important part of Vizcaya's history, and that we were very appreciative of the work that he had done here.
Yeah, and another thing I just wanted to reference is that in the Excel list, actually, you guys credit Eustace Edgecombe with providing the name of Sarah Bethel, which is one of the people we're going to be looking at today.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to what you were just saying about the gardens not being completed, there is a tendency to glorify white names in these spaces, but the labor that was done, all the work, these people, they're here. Their record is here. They helped build this Miami monument, and they weren't credited. They're not given the story. I mean, thankfully there is reference, like there's newspaper articles written about them, and we have this record so we can go through a little bit of their life and cover some of their story. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, again, like we said, how many records have been lost to history? How many names of people who worked in this monument in Miami that we're never going to know about,
Mm-hmm. No, it's true.
Yeah, I think at this point we can kind of show some of the photos of the records that I think it would be great.
Yeah. So let's see. The one I have it as item 3, the cancel check from. Yep, up one more, right there. So this is an example of a canceled check. You can see it says Paul Chalfin Special on the left-hand side of it. I don't know how much we need to explain about checks and how they work. Nobody uses checks anymore. Back before Venmo, you would write on a piece of paper. You would say, give this amount of money to this person, and they would sign it on the back and deposit it in their bank, and then the money would be transferred. So these are actually a really wonderful visual artifact with the holes that are punched in and the stamps, and you get to see someone's signature. This one is signed by August Cook, who was an associate of Paul Chalfin. I don't know what he was paying for. I guess it's $1.30. So not a whole lot, not a big bill.
Right.
But we kept the check, so we have that. The next page is the next slide is a page from the Architectural Review from July of 1917, which was focused entirely on Vizcaya and the construction. And so this we see, I always feel like there's a story here for this to be so precise. So Fred T. Lane Company, they took out a full page ad because they were the general contractor when the home was finished. Fred T. Lay is notable. He later went on to be the builder for the Chrysler Building in New York City.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, but the George Sykes Company starts first, and there's a footnote in the ad that says the exact date, April 1st, was when the transfer of, everything before that date, the other guy did, but then I'm responsible for after that. So I would love to know the story behind this footnote and why they felt the need to be so precise. But those are the two major, the two contractors for Vizcaya. And then the next slide is a daily log from the Fred T. Lay Company. They're a little hard to read, a little bit because it's old and cramped writing, and trying to fit it on a form. But it shows who was the date and who was working, and then sort of the basic work that they were doing, and then it's signed at the bottom, and then you can also see that it has initials on it. So probably what it would be filled out by a work foreman and then signed off, and then a higher person would then sign off again and say, yes, I'm confirming that this is the work. This was who was here. This is what was done. And then the next one is from the George Sykes Company, so earlier. And actually, I'll just point out the one on the right that looks all burnt and the big sort of gaping hole in that's from a paper clip. So
wow, yeah.
Yeah, so when a paper clip rusts, that's what happens. So don't use paper clips, folks.
Yes, let that be it. Yeah, let that be noticed. Anybody at home storing papers with paper clips, take them out.
Yeah, don't tape them either, but also don't use paper clips.
Yeah, no, I've seen damage because of paper clips before, but that is incredible. I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, these are documents that were stored in a variety of locations, not always, archivally pristine. And so when you take South Florida's climate and the humidity and the moisture and the heat, and then add in a little bit of metal and paper, that's what you get.
The recipe for disaster, really is.
It is. Yeah, unfortunately. So, and then the last two slides that I have, one is from KF Martin for general teaming and road contracting. This is, 4 days of teaming. So that would be a team of like horses in a cart, and to bring probably large, heavy materials to the site. You have to pay it in 10 days in cash is what he would like, $24. And then the last one is another bill from a lumber and timber dealer in New York City for some rough cherry.
Wow.
So some cherry wood that was ordered. So we have bills like this too, which are just so interesting to see what kinds of materials were purchased and what the prices were, and just how this was all done. So
yeah, this is some pretty incredible stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, having receipts for everything too. Especially with the cherry wood, it's like what part of the sky the cherry wood is in, or do you think it's been restored at this point? Like no idea.
No, I'm not sure. Well, let's see. Well, the cherry one is the next slide.
Okay.
Alex, yep. And let's see, the date on it is March 15th, 1916. So it would be something original. But I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to ask our collections manager that. What would we have needed cherry wood for?
That's very cool. Yeah, and this is just another example of how you can use these records. Many people think just throw away the receipt, don't think about it. But no, now because we have this, you're able to trace back. And if you do, obviously, if the collection manager knows where it's from, you can go back and trace exactly where it came from, which is kind of incredible.
Exactly. Well, and it's also like if a researcher were to come to us and say, "Oh, I'm doing some research on William Young and Brothers. Do you have any information on him?" And I can say, "Well, yeah, actually, I do. We brought some cherry wood from him."
All right. So I think that's it for the photos of the records, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So now this is kind of where the genealogy section of the conversation is going to start. So, again, when we were putting this together, I kind of wanted to focus on names that are not known to people. So that would you wouldn't include EWF Stirrup. We wouldn't include Eustace Edgecombe because it's already been done. Mm-hmm. So to do this research, I used a mix of our repository here at the Black Archives, and I used Ancestry.com to find census lists and everything. So using Ancestry, I was able to find census records, draft registrations, naturalization records, directory listings, and obituaries for some of our subjects. So with that, I'd like to get started. So James A. McKenzie was the first person I selected. And so again, this is a big credit to the list that was put together by Vizcaya. So the way that it's formatted, I'm going to just kind of run it down real fast. So first, last name, there's life dates, which for James McKenzie is left blank. Origin, Cat Island, Bahamas. Employment dates is blank. Deering era later at 28 years on and off. His role and position is farmer with a question mark. Spouse is Flora, which is, so again, I'll go back after. All right, so children, Brunhilde, Wilfred, Naomi, Edna. References an obituary, notes that he started his own business cutting other people's lawns in 1943. So when you're going through genealogy records, it is kind of like playing a game because we're looking for records based on clues, right? We don't have a full record here. We don't know when he was born. We don't have his life dates, but we do know that he was from the Bahamas, and we know he has a spouse named Flora. So we can go to the next page. All right, so it's going to be a little hard to do. I wanted to go through what each census record, what each column was, but basically from the front, it's the street, avenue, followed by the house number, the name, basically the head of the household, wife, husband, all that, the value of the home, which says 6,500 there, which I think is interesting. And then you have sex, race, age, marital status, age at first marriage. And then they ask questions about the birthplace. So that first line is birthplace of the person. And then the second two are for the father and mother. And so the first thing I'd really like to pay attention to here. So we know that this is our James McKenzie, who worked at the Deering estate for two reasons. Because first, well, obviously the family matches because again, I can't even read it, but I know it says the names of Daniel and Flora and everybody. And so at the very end here, they also ask for industry and occupation. And there it says caretaker, and I know it says really small, but it says private Deering estate. So James McKenzie is actually the only person who listed the Deering estate in the census, because everyone else, I found it somewhere else. But I thought that was really interesting. Obviously, confirmation that he was there in 1930. He may have been there earlier. And the second one is from 1935, Grove census. So he's still living at the same address. You have 3652, so that address matches. Here, he doesn't say he's from Cat Island. It says Nassau. And so that kind of brings me to the first thing I wanted to say about census records is that not everything is going to match, and you have to account for some variance, because when the census takers were going out, it's very possible that Mr. McKenzie was not there to give his information. It's possible that a neighbor was giving it, maybe his wife, And so you already have our first kind of, I don't name the word slips my mind, but yeah. So we're saying Cat Island, and here he's saying Nassau. So that's our first difference. And here in 1935, he is a homeowner. So we know that this home he owned, and right there he says that he's a gardener. So he's changed his role from caretaker to a gardener. We can move on to the next one. And so 1940 census, like you're saying, it's a really good snapshot of people's lives every 10 years. So here everything is the same. Basically, and then you get to the end, says caretaker for a private estate, but again, he doesn't list Deering estate. So again, we don't know who was the one who informed this record. Maybe he's still there at this point. So we're going to come to this a little bit later, so we can move on to the next one. And so this is what I want to show on Ancestry. When you're looking at a directory, this is how it'll show up. And so this is for the year 1928. And the street address is different than the one we've been talking about. So if you can go to the next one. And so quick note about directories. And so and especially we have a genealogist who wants to share their knowledge on this. I don't know quite when directories started being formatted differently, but what was, at least from 1904 to 1928, basically it would list the white population in the front, and then afterwards it would list the colored population. And you can see that in the top right corner underneath the ad, it says colored population. So the way this works is that you have the name being listed, and again, it's very small, it's highlighted, but it says Jazz with the parentheses Flora, industry, which is labor, and this is H, which is household 3664 Grand Avenue. So the address is different. So maybe at this point he wasn't a homeowner yet, but so another thing, if a genealogist wants to jump in on this, we know his name is James Alexander. and maybe that's my best guess for why he's listed like that in the directory, not under his full name, James. But the fact that he was able to be, the fact that Flora was in the parentheses behind him, we know that that is the record. And also, we'll get back to this with Sarah, but when you, especially when you're looking for women, and if they're married, they're always going to show up behind the husband in their own parentheses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just another note is that when you're looking at later directories, it will not be separated like this. So what it'll be like a little C or a little asterisk behind the name to denote if this person was colored or not. And yeah, we can move on to the next thing. And so this was a death notice that I found for him in the Miami Herald. So you know, don't mind the spelling because, you know, just I didn't do this. I just took it off the internet. So pioneer James Alexander McKenzie is a Coconut Grove pioneer, died Wednesday at his home on Percival Street. Mr. McKenzie was born on Cat Island, Bahamas, and came to Coconut Grove in 1916 looking for work. He spent several years with the James Deering estate of Vizcaya and had work as a farmer for the Peacock family at Bird and Lejeune Roads in 1943. Mr. McKenzie became an independent nurseryman and gardener, and he was a deacon and treasurer at the Church of God Prophecy on Grand Avenue. Mr. McKenzie leaves his family, Flora, Wilfred, Naomi, and Brunhilde, and Edna. And so just real quick, so this is from 1979. So we know that from 1930 to 1979, Mr. James McKenzie lived in the same home in Coconut Grove at 3652, which I could only hope for that kind of longevity in my life. It's great. Again, in 1940, we saw the record where he says he was working for a private estate. Again, no assumption because we don't know. It could have been at Vizcaya or it could have been at Peacock. And again, we know that because of this death notice. Mm-hmm. And then again, there's confirmation of him being born on Cat Island, Bahamas. And another thing I really want to pay attention to is his emigration year, which actually I believe in the 1930 census is there also. So it says that he emigrated here in 1916. And I really want to pay attention to that because if we move on to the next record, which is his naturalization record, again, it's really hard to see, but here he lists the year he emigrated as 1921. So there's a 5-year gap there. And so again, with Census Records, it's kind of a toss-up who provided the information. But interesting that it said it in the death notice, it said 1916. In the original 1930 census, it said 1916. But here, and again, I would probably put the most weight on this petition for naturalization because I would imagine that he'd have to fill this out himself. Mm-hmm. So this was from 1954, and he says that he got here in 1921 on the SS Priscilla. So again, Ancestry has that function that you can look at shipping manifests and passenger lists also. And Karen, you throw in anything that you want. I mean, this is fun for me. This is looking at this.
Well, I love this. Yeah. Well, this one too. I would expect that this would be a better document because he signed it himself.
Right.
So we presume that he read it and reviewed it and could have made changes if he wanted to. Although maybe since he's petitioning for naturalization, maybe it's just like, let's get the paperwork in and not ruffle any feathers. You don't know.
And that's what I was thinking. And like, sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, it's okay. No, I was just going to say too that as far as the census records or any records really, you have the person who's giving the information, but then you have someone who's recording it separately. And there's human error there. People can pronounce something and they can hear it wrong and write the wrong thing. I've seen some where I followed a family trying to find where they were from and their background. And I'll tell you, every census, the wife gets a few years younger. And so, it's like, how old are you? Well, I'm not going to tell you that. So, because you're just a guy on my doorstep. So even that, where sometimes you have to look and then find, okay, what's the birth record? Okay, she was honest until she hit 40, and then she started shaving years off. It makes me think of the old the unreliable narrator in any in any storytelling. If you have a first person narrator, they're unreliable. But and I shouldn't impugn everyone's character that way. But I mean it jokingly. But we're relying on people to remember exactly when they arrived. I love that there's a ship's manifest, though. I would hope that has survived, because then that's another way to confirm what is written here.
Absolutely. And yeah, just the last thing I wanted to pay attention to here. So it actually also gives their marriage date. So I think it says September 1st, 1922. September 4th, 1922 is the day that James and Flora got married, which again, for genealogists, that's like that, you want that information. That's great.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
And actually on this naturalization record, it also lists the day that she emigrated. So it says that she emigrated in 1923. And if we go back to, you don't have to do it, Alex, thank you. But if you go back to 1936, it actually lists 1923 as the year she emigrated. So again, there is that is a very, it's interesting that you would have the gap in his immigration year, but not hers. So yeah, just interesting stuff.
Yeah, it is.
And yes, so we can move on to the next person. So Samuel E. Sands, which my bad, I didn't put the E in there. So here it lists that he was born from 1900 to 1976, that he's from the Bahamas, that he worked at Vizcaya from 1914 to 1966, that he worked during the construction and the Deering era and later, that he was a water boy, a shell sorter, a flower boy, a gardener, and a head gardener. And that he has no spouse or children that we know of, and that his reference is a newspaper article. So real quick, can you tell me what a shell sorter is?
I'm thinking that it must be, we have shell mosaics. And so he may have been working on that. That would be my first guess. Yeah. Yeah. Otherwise I'm not sure.
All right. Yeah. Let's move on to the record. No, that's great. I just saw that. I was like, I have no idea what a shell sorter is. So
yeah, we do have this sort of, we looked at whether they're sailor's valentines or not, which are shell arrangements. Some permanent, like some like mortared in, and then some meant to just last for until the tide washes them off.
Right.
But yeah, that would be my first guess.
Cool. And so okay, the first record that I found for Samuel Sands is actually in 1920. So here again, he's not the head of the household at this point. He's only 19 years old. But you see the head of the household is William Sands. So that's his father, right? They're all listed as being from the Bahamas. And at the very end, where you see occupation, right? So Samuel worked as a gardener for a private estate, and his father worked as a laborer at a private estate. Again, so I actually was like, oh, this is interesting. I went back to the Vizcaya record to see if I could find anything on William Sands, and unfortunately nothing came up. So it kind of comes up to what we were talking about before. It could have been a subcontractor. It could have been any number of things for why he wasn't recorded, or it's possible that he didn't work there at all. We don't know the information. But, just you see it here. So something to keep in mind, and we can move on to the next one. And so this is from the draft registration card in 1942. Clearly, this is obviously for World War II, right? So you have his full name, Samuel E. Court Sands, his place of residence, his 5-digit phone number, his age, date of birth, where he was from originally, Rock Sound, Bahama Island. And so what I think is really interesting, maybe you can help me out with this, Karen. Mr. E.M. Bell is the person that he lists as always knowing his address. And then at the bottom, he lists his employer name and address, which is James Deering Estate. Yeah. So when I looked through the Vizcaya record, I tried to see if there's anything on an E.M. Bell, and nothing came up. So is that a name that you've heard of ever being listed?
That is not a name that jumps out at me. He must have been someone who worked there at that time, and maybe was a supervisor. But no, that name does not jump out at me.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yep.
And he's listed at being at the same address. So yeah, it is bring up some questions about who this gentleman was and what his role was at the estate. So
yeah, he's giving the work address. He's giving the Vizcaya address as his address. So that would suggest someone who works here as well. Yeah.
Right. And yeah, so this is what I was able to find for Samuel Sands. So we can move on to the next person. And so Sarah Bethel, right? This might be telling on myself a little bit here. When I was actually going through this, I was looking for records and I totally got it wrong. I had Sarah Bethel records for Sarah Bethel who lived in Overtown, who was a laundress and a chambermaid, but it was not the right Sarah Bethel. So I only realized this because when I was going back, because it was like the original record, it didn't show the names of her descendants, of her children, and I was like, maybe it comes along later. Maybe they were later in life, right? And so I continue following the record, and it's like there's just no kids anywhere. It's just like she had some lodgers staying with her, and I'm like, none of this makes sense. And I'm like looking at the age. It's like she died in 1973, and at this age, I don't. So I went back, restarted the whole search, and I was able to correct the record and find the actual Sarah Bethel. So yeah, it was a little tough. I was like, wow, that would have been really bad if I had come onto this live with all the wrong information.
Was there any connection between the two?
No,
like, are they
could
like
find,
an aunt and a niece,
not that I could find, unfortunately.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so on the Vizcaya record, Sarah Bethel is listed as, we don't have her birth date, but she died in 1973. She listed as being from Harbor Island, Bahamas, working during the Deering era and later, being a laundress helper and a maid. And so this is actually the most complete part of the record, is that it has all of her children. So Wheelock, Sweetlawn, Anderson, Miriam, Gladys, Virginia, Geneva. So these were the names that I helped use to confirm whether my record is right or not. And her reference came from Eustace Edgecombe and Adams Cash in the personal file. So we can move on to the census record. So here in the 1920 census, we actually find that she's married. So her husband's name is Clarence Bethel. He's the head of the household. Mm-hmm. And so you see Sarah, you see Gladys, Livingston, and that is Mary, Virginia. So yeah, you can confirm that this is her children. These are the names that match. So this is the Sarah Bethel that we're looking for. But the first thing I'd really like everyone to pay attention to is place of birth. For Sarah, that's listed as Florida, which is a direct contradiction with what we have here in the record. So yeah, so, and again, so when you go to the end, she's a cook for a private home. And in 1920, we don't know whether that is a Vizcaya or somewhere else, but just really pay attention to that place of birth, because that's going to come back. We can move on. So it's Miami Directory in 1928. And so again, you find the name. This is, you see the colored population at the top. It has Bethel, and then you have Clarence, because of course she's married to Clarence. So she is listed as the wife. Laborers at, I can't even see what this is. I think it's 3429. I can't tell. Well, the point, she lives at that address for the next, through the next couple censuses, so we can verify that this is also her listing. We can move on to the next one. All right, so in the 1930 census, we have more names from her children that match up. She's still listed as being born in Florida, but at this point, she actually So at this point, she is a housekeeper for a private home. And it kind of matches, because what I gained from this record is that she had multiple roles within Vizcaya during her time there. So it's possible that she was working as a cook and then made it to another position. Again, no real verification whether if it even was Vizcaya, but at least we found her story, right? And so we can go on to the next one. And then this is the most interesting one, right? So in 1940, again, all the names are for children. And then and also just real quick, there is slight differences between the 30 and 40 census. They stop asking about the parents' birthplace. And so in her birthplace, you see that it's listed as the Bahamas. So again, you go you get 20 years of census that basically it's listed as living in Florida or being born in Florida. And then 1940, she's listing herself as being born in the Bahamas. So again, like you're saying, it could be someone misheard. It could have been other people providing the information. Maybe she actually provided the information for this record.
Maybe, yeah.
And yeah, she's not listed as having an occupation at this point. So we can assume that she's probably not working. Well, if she did, right? We don't know if she was working at Vizcaya at this point or not.
Yeah. Well, and should we mention too, we're not stopping at 1940 because we got tired of doing research, but because the 1950 census has not been released yet.
Right. I actually was going to bring that up at the end, so we might as well.
Oh, already. Okay, we'll save it for the end.
So, yeah. The reason that this stops in 1940 is not because I'm being lazy. It's because the 1950 census is not available yet. The 1950 census is going to be available for everyone to view in April of 2022.
April 1st.
Asking yourself, oh, why is 2022? It's like, okay, because there is a 72-year rule, and that is on the average lifespan of people. So this is just to keep everyone's information kind of safe. And yeah,
people like us have that date on our calendars already.
Right. And yeah, that pretty much covers it for me. Yeah, just a couple general rules on genealogy. Just, spelling changes like we're seeing, like people's names. This is perfect. Thank you. You can have variances in the name. It can show up with a letter off or a letter added for some reason. You can birth year. Again, like we're saying, it changes because depending on the census record, it could not be the person saying it, could be someone else. So the way I conducted this search basically is, again, so they were saying here in the list, it says that all these people worked during the Deering era. So I made that assumption as 1925. And then I kind of gave it like a 10-year range and went through that. So that's how I was able to find the census records, the directories, and all this. You can add keywords based on occupation, race, nationality, and what collection you want to focus on, census record, passenger list, etc. And yeah, just so again, exact dates. Don't rely too much on exact dates. Give yourself a range so that you can cast a wider net to find what you need. Don't jump to conclusions like I did and get the wrong record for someone that is not who you're looking for.
Yeah.
Married names. Yeah, just keep in mind that if you have a maiden name, that is probably going to be much more helpful than a married name.
Well, and a death record is great too, because oftentimes a death record will list the parents' names and also the person's place and date of birth. And so that gives you then the next generation back to go back looking.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But this kind of research, I would do this too, where in the center there, where it says lived in and then the year and location, I do that too, because I'll be researching someone who worked at Vizcaya and I don't know when they died. I don't know when they were born. I don't know where they were born, but I can say, okay, I know they were in Miami in 1916.
And that's another thing I wanted to account for is, especially when you're talking about early Miami, it's transients, because especially if you're looking at records from 1910, 1920, 1930, Miami did not exist prior to 1896. So you're not going to find a whole lot of people probably until the 1930s or 40s that were listed as being born here in Miami.
Yeah.
You're going to find people who are emigrating from elsewhere. So you need to be able, again, that they have some sort of record in Florida or that they were alive during this time. And yeah. There you go. Yeah. Genealogy. It's about finding clues.
It is. It's a puzzle. Yeah.
It's about solving the puzzle. Exactly.
Yeah. So Alex, did we have any questions? I'm gonna guess that means no.
Yeah, I'm guessing that means that we don't have any questions.
Okay, we answered all the questions.
All right. Cool. Well, okay, so I really hope that everyone has enjoyed this conversation today in celebration of American Archives Month. Today we shed a bit of light and uncovered some of the people who worked behind the scenes of one of Miami's most famous monuments. And I think this is really an example of why archival work is so important. It preserves the past and gives us a glimpse into it. And because these records exist and we were able to find these names within Vizcaya's records, we were able to find Sarah, James, and Samuel and illuminate some of their life here in Miami. And again, they contributed to the greatness of our city. And again, I think this again helps confirm for us that Black history is Miami history. They're not distinct, they are together.
Absolutely.
And that goes across the board. And so just a little bit about the Black Archives. So we are working hard to continue adding to the historical record and telling the story of the accomplishments of Black Miami. With that being said, I'm really happy to announce our upcoming exhibit, If These Streets Could Talk. It is going to open on December 1st alongside Soul Basil, and it will be a historic exploration of early Black Miami that is going to show a different side of the city and tell the story of Black Miami. And if this conversation piqued your interest in genealogy, I would like to tell you that the Black Archives offers free genealogical research appointments. And if you have any materials related to Black history, Black Miami history, genealogies, or otherwise, and you're interested in donating them, please reach out to BALT.org. The email is archivist@BALT.org. You'll find that on the website, and we'll be sure to get in contact. So yeah, that's it.
Thanks so much, Louis.
Thank you so much. This is great.
Yep, this was fun.
All right.
Have a great day, everybody.